the input from the team, and especially from the intersection from the international team and the local team, has been a quite interesting experience of collective intelligence of young people. And so I really appreciated and enjoy, and I got a lot of good input and good mood on the project, especially concentrated on the idea to create space more than architecture. Then, of course, the architecture and good architecture is the consequence. But the project has been focused on the idea that people that are suffering in a camps because they lost their house or they are poor, they need to have a proper future. And also through architecture and through empty space, that mean public space, you can try to give this impression about future. So this, I really thank the team, because they work quite a lot on this idea of well-being of the people that would stay in this camps, with a very simple principle to do something where we would be happy to stay. Of course, nobody is going to aim to be in a camp, but with the principle that is a good space to stay. I would leave the floor to the team. I don't know who is presenting.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. So we are one of the mixed groups, as Lina mentioned. We are Callum, Maria, Mohammed, me, Paula, Poliana, and Hasban. And we have had the great pleasure to be tutored by Raul. So yeah, we can start. So we are calling our project Hose Yard. It's the shade that connects us. Hose is shade in Somali. So Mariam, take the floor and you can start.
Thank you, Paula, and welcome everybody to our presentation. So this is our content. We're focusing on the existing problems and then how to find solutions and strategies, going from our unit to the cluster scale and ending it with the urban scale. Paula, next. We did some studies on IDPs in general. Today, one of the issues that's very prominent in any shelter strategy is, first of all, isolation, density, vulnerability, as well as uniformity. So this is a root cause that's existing within the world. And if we look at the numbers, Somalia falls in one of the countries that's top IDP numbers, and it shows it's a huge national crisis. So looking at that problem in general, we wanted to see how we can propose a solution that would address the architecture at large, as well as Somalia specifically. Paula, next, please. Yes, this is context of Somalia. So if we look at the studies and the materials that have been gathered based on our scenarios, we have 3 different scenarios, 3 cities. One of the major problems was, first of all, the Somali IDPs are very independent. They do not integrate with their host cities. So the relationship is a little bit compromised. So that's one area to look at it. Secondly, they're at a fragile state. These people had lives going on, but then disruption happened and everything stopped. So the third part is lack of integration. They don't integrate easily, and that is because they think of when will they go back to their homes. So one of the ways to tackle this would be, how can we make this area or this transitional phase somehow their home? And finally, the IDPs in Somali communities are mainly women and children. That tells us exactly the user we're dealing with. They're very fragile and they are on a building stage. So if we look, these are pictures and references from the shelter cluster that was provided and exist. The disconnection is very prominent. They do not belong in any city. So they act as their own microsome, their own neighborhood, and that draws a proper line between these IDP communities and the cities. And of course, we have one major issue, which is instability. Any minute, they can be evicted because of land acquisitions and other problems. And finally, one problem that seriously exists is fear, especially for women, if they're about to use toilets, and just generally the environment is not the safest. So we wanted to focus on these core problems that exist within the Somali IDPs. Paula, next, please. So our design driver and design question was, how can shelter architecture empower Somali displaced communities rather than just reinforcing their vulnerability? So this is one thing that's very prominent in the entire world, but we want to look at it differently. How can we use architecture as a tool to break away from fragility and move into empowerment? So Paula, next, please. One of the ways we can easily do that is establishing the core Somali values. If we look at any Somali value, any Somali society, there are very prominent values that exist within all the Somalis, whether they're based in Somalia or they're in the diaspora. One of those values is community festival. They're very social. Secondly is identity. They really hold and respect their culture and traditions wherever they are. And thirdly, it's resilience. They do not hold back and they don't stop. So they always find ways to keep it moving. One of these, every core value has been highlighted within the IDP camps. For example, we see reference of communities gathering under a tree in one of the IDP sites. And another one is identity. This is actually a wedding hall within the IDP camps. And these are Somali patterns and Somali traditional clothing fabric. And finally is the resilience, where they are very much economically spirited. So they know how to start their shop fronts and build from the grounds. Paula, please, next. So when we started approaching the design, we wanted to see how can we bring beauty into these everyday spaces, because we're designing a home, a shelter. So one of the elements that exist within any Somali neighborhood, Somali street, Somali household is number one, very strong identity, strong use of colors, strong use of traditional patterns, as well as motifs and paintings and pottery. So we wanted to see how can we extend the normal neighborhoods within Somalia to the shelters or the IDP camps. That started with identifying the spaces. So we started seeing, number one, as an identity in space, how can we take it with us? Secondly, Paula, next. The second form, yes, was to see the streets. If we look at Somali streets, they're very different than any streets in the world, mainly because of how rooted they are in some traditional communal aspects. First of all, streets are more than just a crossing or a movement area. It's more of a gathering space. Every household has frontal areas where people could come out and just sit and watch the neighborhood. So that tells us these streets are used mainly as a community purpose. And then secondly is the wall murals. They use a lot, even in their storefronts. Somali people love painting and they love colors. So instead of using the typical posters, they opt for using any painting that could depict exactly what the shopfront is selling or what it is about. So these are reference images from different areas of the city showing exactly that is a cultural concept. Finally, acts of resilience. If we know, they always set up different stalls, different micro businesses are reflected through the Somali streets. And that also tells us how the street and the Somali home, basically the line is very blurred because in most world, there is a proper line between public space and private space. But in Somalia or any Somali city, you will notice that the semi-private area is the shop fronts and the frontal stores, and they use it. So in our design approach, these are the spaces we're catering to, and we want to showcase how we can bring them within our identity and the reinforced shelter strategy. Forward, Paula, please. So now that we have our approach, our main idea is, first of all, starting with a courtyard and a central tree, respecting the Somali traditions that existed for centuries. Trees hold different symbolism. They are more of just a gathering space. It's space for storytelling, teaching, and a lot of that. So from one shaded courtyard, our design builds up a networks of homes, shared neighborhoods, markets and streets, and different urbanism functions. So basically, that is the entire courtyard strategy, and which we aim to translate the cultural heritage within design technologies. Forward. So if we look at our IDP housing strategy, is how can we create a settlement that starts from the unity and then moves into sustainable cluster and integrates seamlessly with the city. One of the ways to do that was we started creating neighborhood with 4 families each and a central courtyard that builds up a trust, which is definitely something they would need and require to function properly and to be back on their feet. That allows us to have a sustainable cluster with fully integrated smart solution systems. And then from one micro unit, we extend into an entire micro neighborhood that easily could fit in with the existing city or the host city. Ola, next. Yes, so the courtyard is not just used as a courtyard area, it's having multi-purpose functions. First of all, of course, it's a cultural space where things are happening. Mothers and women are cooking, children are playing, it's a safe space for them, as well as it's acting as a climate buffer. We're dealing with harsh climate, we're dealing with different cities. We have, for example, Bosaso, which requires a lot of heat. We have Dolo, we have Baidawa. So this acts also as a thermal strategy. And finally, it's an economic enabler. There's a cultural Somali system that's based on group funding. It's called Ayuto. So the more the people know each other, the easier that can happen. It happens already in the IDPs, but based by NGOs, but this will allow them to integrate within their neighborhood, build trust in a way that they can start supporting each other and create micro proper climate, micro economic areas that could finally bring them back to their feet. Moving forward, to apply the tree system in our courtyard, we have identified the different trees that exist within Somalia. These are some of the prominent trees. So for example, in Baidawa, we're using a different tree. We're using umbrella tree, for example. And secondly, we're using Frankenstein tree in Dolo, and we're using in Bosaso a tree that could cater to the climate. So based on the climates that we're having, we have catered accordingly so that this becomes a sustainable environment that could function in different conditions, whether climatic conditions. Moving forward.
Okay, hello. So we begin the implement. Okay, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, so we begin the implementation of our concept with a general approach across all sites. All plots will share the same geometry and an approximate area of 110 square meters. Their placement is designed to allow the formation of the semi-private inner courtyard that my colleague talked about. The core structure of the shelter will be a timber frame set on stone foundation and a single pitched roof of CGI sheets. This structural module will be replicated identically across all plots in all the 3 sites, serving as our proposal solution for the emergency phase of the project. In this initial stage, residents will be able to install lightweight partitions, such as fabrics or CGI sheets between these pillars to form their basic shelter. If we go next. We aim to give families the freedom to decide how they will use their plot and how they configure their living spaces. Our proposal offers a variety of wall types and shading veranda system. The walls are made of different materials depending on the site and are categorized into these 4 types. So we have solid wall, ventilation wall, window wall, and door wall. Each family within the allocated budget of their unit will be able to obtain approximately 10 to 14 wall panels and 3 to 6 verandas. And we need every time 2 walls to infill a space between 2 pillars. So each wall has a width of 120 meters. This approach ensures that the main shelter structure remains robust, consistent, and professionally built, while the infill walls are left to the discretion of the residents. integrated with the help of YOM. This strategy introduces architectural diversity and allows each plot to gain its own identity and character. We can move forward. As previously mentioned, the rigid timber structure represents the emergency phase of the project. Once the wall panel are added, we transition to the permanent phase. And in the future, we also anticipate possible extensions, which will be presented later. Below, we showcase our proposed wall layout options. All configurations include 2 rooms and a total interior area of around 21 square meters. Each family can choose its favorite layout. On the right-hand side rendering, we see an example of a permanent shelter built in Bossasso. We can move next. So in order to ensure sustainable design, we began by analyzing the natural environment in which the project is located, and we looked for solutions specific to on-site conditions. In addition to rainwater harvesting from the roof, we also propose a system of harvesting water from atmospheric humidity. This strategy was identified as particularly relevant in Bossasso, where rainwater is almost entirely absent throughout the year. Humidity harvesting systems are commonly used in coastal regions, and several studies confirm their effectiveness in arid climates. Also in Yemen, we have such systems. And we recommend that future feasibility studies can be conducted to evaluate and implement such systems at scale. We can go next. Our proposal is self-sufficient, and we designed to support an economically sustainable lifestyle. The large roof surface we propose significantly increases the amount of rainwater that can be harvested throughout the year. For example, in Dolo, a single shelter can collect up to 15,000 liters of water annually. The roof also enhances natural ventilation inside the dwelling and partially protects the walls from sun. Beneath the wooden trusses, we hang fabrics for thermal comfort. By elevating the roof highest at the center, we create also shade areas in this semi-private interior yard. And each cluster includes a tree, which contributes to the air quality and thermal comfort. And moreover, the urban layout allows the future integration of shelters into public water and sanitation systems, ensuring long-term adaptability and resilience. And we can go to the next one.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, we are creating a cluster system of at least 4 shelters centered around a courtyard and a tree, like Hasban mentioned. The idea of creating this cluster system is also to foster a sense of community between families that might never have lived close to each other or even know each other. So this spreads from the smallest scale in the sense of the shelter into the urban scale like we're going to see next. As the families are moving through these sites, not necessarily from an existing community, so we can create this community within each site. So moving to Baidoa, we have seen that each city has a different scenario through how the families are living and their livelihood activities. So Baidoa is a farming livestock community. It has been, sorry. Is missing something here, sorry. Yeah, Baidoa is mostly a rural site composed by pastoralist communities. So for that reason, the cluster scale, we focus on having outdoor empty areas for each family to create their livestock, be it sheep, goats, or even like a crop area storage for them. So like Hasban mentioned before, we have a permanent shelter, which is composed by the 2 shelters plus 1 veranda. And in the future, we see that it can be expanded into adding a new shelter into it, a new unit where we can also locate in the future a toilet. But we're still keeping these areas outdoors for the livestock or their workshops or anything that will fit into their livelihood activities. So for Dulu, we have a mostly farming community. They need spaces to do their livelihood activities, so we are thinking of having small yards within the cluster, but also giving them on the urban scale bigger livelihood areas. The same thing with the blends. We have crop storage area, we have areas for tea shops, trade areas. So these communities being more farmer related, they would also have some produce they might want to sell to their neighbors that produce a different thing. And the same way, we imagine in the future they can have an expansion to have another shelter, another unit, and have the toilets included as well. And Bosaso is the most different one in terms of community and their livelihood activities. The area has the harshest climate, so they're not very prone to farming or livestock. They mostly work with markets and shops and informal markets as well. So we try to think of creating spaces, shaded spaces with our veranda system in the future, that they could have their shops, tea shops, coffee shops, bread stalls, things that can create this sense of community, but also give them a livelihood and have the power to have their shops within their own cluster, their own plot. So these plots are usually more occupied through trades, through workshops, skill training areas that they can have workshops with their neighbors and create this other sense of community as well through this. Also having the extension area is still included in every plot for the future. Also within the cluster system, we have identified the potential of creating a toilet area where we have separated women area and men's area. So like Arya mentioned before, the fear of women going through the latrines placed in existing IDP sites, we try to reduce that fear and create a more lively space, having these toilets always facing either local or main streets and having the separation of gender. And in the future, we identify, like I said before, the potential of having the toilets move into the plot. So this area could be further developed into a new public space. We think of using for these toilet units as well the same type of structure that we are using for the shelters, so it would be easily built for the community, but also separated from the existing shelters within this cluster. So we think, seeing the future, how we can grow urbanly, we see that our cluster system moves from the urban scale easily. We have identified the potential of our system to be adaptable to different IDP scenarios, not only in Somalia, but other scenarios as well, because it creates easy growth and expansion and can be easily adapted to different morphological sites. So looking more at the urban scale and the urban approach that we are having, we have established some rules or some ground rules for how we develop each site. So first of all, we have an urban infrastructure of always having bigger main roads with at least 6 meters wide and local roads of at least 3 meters wide to allow for cars and emergency cars for if needed to go through the site, and also to create evacuation routes for the entire site. We created different size of clusters, so not necessarily only a 4-plot cluster. We can have 6, 8 clusters or different shapes of courtyards depending on the needs of the communities and how the presented site is. We have one toilet cluster placed no more than 15 meters away of every plot. And we created public areas and public facilities within every site given, every scenario, because we've identified that some have lacking public facilities around, or we've also identified their livelihood activities that need bigger areas to exist, or how these they also gather to the community and foster a sense of community in different scales. We also think through the harvesting system that Hassan mentioned before, the adding of trees through the sites is also one of our strategies for climate resilience for these sites. So now we're going to look specifically through each site, starting with Baidoa is a pastoralist community of about 140 households within this following our clusters, we are getting to 140 plots within the site, having the water facilities, the courtyards place, the common spaces. So Baidoa is an area where there are more public spaces and facilities around, like a mosque, a school. They already have a borehole in the area. So through our common spaces, we try to have things more gathering through like the supply distribution that might have need through HUL or through OMGNs. The public markets for the people to share their crops, to not have the need to go outside the camp for many of their activities. So in the case of Baidoa, the livelihood areas are mainly focused on livestock and also having the humidity harvesting and the common areas. So here we have two images of how we imagine these common areas could be explored. On the left, we have the street markets, kind of like the souks is one of our references, and where the women and the families around can create these shop areas and the livelihood areas as well on the right. And now we have Dulo, which has a unique characteristic, like Maria mentioned before, because tenancy of the plots are not that long. So the two plots down on the left have a shorter tenancy. So for that, we try to place most of the plots on the right-hand side. You have about 165 plots on that area. And on the lower one on the left, we have 42 plots, which totals to 270 7 plots, 7 more than what is asked in the scenario. We also have the communal spaces and the livelihood areas around it, and we try to place especially the farming area on the left in the plot that has a shorter tenancy. And also, like, this area doesn't have a mosque around, so we place it around our site. And we try to implement these public facilities and activities to also foster the sense of community. So like I said, on the left, we have the common use areas. These are the toilets, have the toilets in the back, the humidity harvesting, and we're creating this space for like almost like a square that can be a transitional space for the community to have their gatherings and live like day-to-day activities. On the left, on the right, sorry, we have the livelihood area for the farming and the livestock creation if they have. And in the back, we have another example of the toilet facility happening quite open to the eye of the public to increase the sense of security of whoever is using it. And lastly, we have Bosaso. Bosaso is the city with the harshest climate, has really strong winds. So we try to place on the areas around the plot, especially on the sides, these public activities that could create a barrier for the shelters and the households from this harsh climate. So also this one is the city that doesn't have much of a livelihood around farming. So we have the strongest market area, and Bosaso is also in the expansion area of the city. So there are not many public facilities around. So we've included a mosque, communal space, women's center, school, all these ideas that could be implemented to the site. And we also are meeting the requirement of the 225 plots. Like I mentioned, the supply distribution, we also try to keep the supply distribution area always close to the entrance of the site. So it will be easy for them to bring maintenance and anything that the site might need. So on the left, we have this idea of having a strong market system that could happen daily or on special days. And on the right, we have some of our common use areas. In this case, is a prayer area, and in the back, the women's center. So in total, we try to create a system that allows for the IDP families to create a sense of community through every scale, be it the shelter scale, the cluster scale, and the urban scale, and uniting them, connecting them through this idea of a shared courtyard and a shared space. Thank you.